Microjig, maker of the gripper. Work safer, work smarter.
Make this adjustable mortise fixture with me today for making loose tenon joinery. Then maybe you can start reserving the term pocket screws for when you actually have screws in your pocket. For the L bracket portion of the jig, which you can see over here in the model, I'm going to use a couple pieces of scrap hardwood that I had in my scrap bin. Now the first thing I need to do is make a nice straight edge, and we'll do that at the joiner. Then we'll cut these pieces to rough width. It's important to remember to put your freshly edged joint inside against the fence before ripping, because putting it the other way just wouldn't make a lot of sense. For that last rip, I had my fence adjusted to 5 inches. Now I'm going to adjust it to 4 inches for the next rip. At the joiner, I'm going to flatten one face of each board, and then we'll take these over to the planer and we'll take them to their final width. So these two pieces are going to form the backbone of the jig, and they're going to come together something like that, and they'll get attached to the workbench. Now the next thing we need to do is cut these two pieces to length, and then we can glue and screw them together. I'm just going to make a mark to get the location for the holes for the screws. Now with the thinner board clamped into the wider board temporarily, I should be able to pre-drill for some screws and then glue this together and secure it with screws. What else? So for the top of the jig where the router is going to travel, I'm going to use a piece of 1/2 inch ply because I just happen to have it in the shop. But you could also use 3/4 inch ply if you wanted to. But I wouldn't probably go any thinner than 1/2 inch. When you guys weren't looking, I went ahead and squared up one end of this plywood. Now I'm just going to cut the other end to length. I clamped the L portion of my jig to my workbench. Now I'm going to take that piece of plywood that we cut out earlier, and I'm going to attach it to this L portion using a couple brads, and then I'm going to reinforce those brads with some screws. It's important to make sure that the back of the plywood remains flush with the L portion of the jig. And in order to do that, I'm going to use a piece of scrap wood and just butt the two up against each other. It's projects like this where scrap wood really does come in handy. That's why I like to always save my offcuts. I'm going to use this piece of scrap wood to make the fence. The first thing I'm going to do is straighten one edge at the joiner, and then we'll cut it to width at the table saw. So while you guys weren't looking again, I went ahead and face jointed one side, and I planed my fence to thickness. And I also went ahead and cut one end square. Now I just need to cut it to length using a miter jig at the table saw. In order to get the location of the holes that I need to drill in the L portion of the jig, I went ahead and put some screws into the fence so that the points just barely penetrate out the other side. Now I can use these to mark the location for the holes. I went ahead and pre-drilled into the fence for my toggle clamp. Now, in order to attach that, I was going to use my regular number 8 screws, but these pass through the holes in the toggle clamp a little too easily. Now, I suppose I could use a washer to back it up, to hold it on, but I have some of these panhead pocket screws that I never seem to find a use for. So I'm going to go ahead and use those for this task. Now with just a couple clamps, we can go ahead and attach this to the workbench. Now we're almost done. The last thing we need to do is make a slot in the surface of the plywood. And to do that, I'm going to use a plunge router with an edge guide. And I went ahead and chalked up a 1/2 inch spiral bit. And I marked off the length of the slot that I'm going to make. And I don't want the slot to go into the fence underneath. So we want to stop a little bit before the fence. So there's one last thing we need to do before we can call this fixture done, and that's to make a positive stop on each end, and that'll allow us to control the length of the mortise in your end grain. Because really, there's nothing more mundane than setting up 50 end grain mortises and each time setting up the distance that you need to travel. So we'll do that next. Yeah, and you guessed it, for the positive stops, we're going to use more scrap wood. Can't use the good stuff for this. Now I just need to plane these two positive stop blanks down to a reasonable thickness, then we'll cut them to length and head over to the router table. Using a 3/8 inch spiral bit at the router table, I'm going to make a channel going through both positive stop. And I'm going to do that using a combination of stop blocks at the router table. Yeah, I know, stop blocks being used to make positive stops. I'm going to drill 2 holes for 2 1/4 inch carriage bolts, one on each end to hold the positive stop. So there's really nothing to using this fixture. It's really easy to use and it gives you repeatable results. The first thing you want to do is take your stock that you want to make an end grain mortise in for your loose tenon and mark the center location on the stock, and also go ahead and make marks for the shoulder on each end. What's great about this fixture is that you only need to make these marks once, and then you can go ahead and batch off all of your pieces without making any more shoulder marks or center marks. So in order to use this mortising fixture, there's 2 things you need to have. One of them is a plunge router, and the second one is an edge guide for your plunge router. And if you don't already have an edge guide for your plunge router, you might as well get one anyway, because they're incredibly useful and you'll find lots of things to do with them around the shop. So it might be difficult to see, but I'm going to lower this router bit close to the surface of the workpiece, and I'm going to adjust my fence until the router bit is right over top of that center mark. Right there, and then I'm just going to lock it down. Now I just need to adjust the length of the travel for the mortise. I'm going to move the router bit over the mark that's on this side, and I'm going to adjust the positive stop and move it into the side of the router and lock it down. So now I just need to move the router bit next to the other shoulder mark, move the other positive stop in, and lock it down as well. Oh, also make sure that your router is unplugged during this process, just in case. Before we can start making our end grain mortises, there's only one more adjustment we need to make, and that's the depth of the mortise. So lower the router bit on top of the workpiece, and I like to use these brass setup bars, and I just put it on top of one of the turrets on the router and just lower the positive stop onto the brass setup bar. Now when I drive the plunge router down, I'm only going to travel 1/2 inch. So just to recap all of these adjustments, the edge guide controls how far out the router moves in this direction or in that direction. The positive stops that we made on each end of the fixture control the length of the mortise, and the router turret controls the depth of the mortise. And once you have all this set up, you only need to do it once, and then you can mortise all day long. So let's try one. When you go to make the mortise on the other end of the board for your other floating tenon, make sure that you keep the same face facing out. That way, if your mortise wasn't exactly in the center, it'll be off by the same amount on each end, and your stock will be symmetrical with its tenons. And that's kind of what you want. So if you like the plans to build my mortise fixture, which include instructions and a detailed SketchUp file, you'll see a link in the description, or you might see a link somewhere over here. The plans are only a few bucks. I thought I'd show you guys my original mortise fixture that I made back in 2009, and I used to use this exclusively for all my end grain mortises for loose tenon joinery. But today I mostly use my horizontal mortiser. I stripped off all the hardware to make the new one, so this will probably go into the scrap bin. So if you thought this video was pretty cool and you liked it, please like and also subscribe to my channel if you're not already. And I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.